and a wonderful Wednesday evening to everybody. Josh here with drinking champagne. And no, your eyes do not deceive you. That is not champagne. That is Mr. Matthew Desantis, failed to menace. Joining me while our jet set friend is somewhere in Italy, apparently being recognized while wearing a Naira Bets hat. But you know, I don't know how. I mean, well, first of all, I mean, Italy. I mean, I think Andrew is like 6'3", or I think he's 6'4". I think he's taller than
Right.
I am, and so I'm sure him, just being that tall and wearing a Naira Bets hat, I'm sure that he would easily be picked out of any type of lineup. But yeah,
Very
Andrew.
much.
I was Andrew. Matthew, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, and while I'm not in Italy, I am Italian, and so I have a lot of family still over there. So I don't know, maybe it was one of my family members who recognized Andrew. And I saw Naira Betts is like, offering to get Andrew's fiance a Naira Betts hat too, so she can, blend in with him and be recognized internationally, which I thought was very cute and funny. Uh, yeah, no, I'm doing well. It's a great time of year. I think we obviously wrapped up the Triple Crown. We got Royal Ascot this week, but a lot of great, exciting races yet to come for the 3-year-old group in particular, going to Haskell, going up to Saratoga, everybody's favorite time of year, I think. And so, yeah, it's been going well for me.
Yeah, and obviously we talked a little bit earlier about what we wanted to talk about today, and I'm just going to throw a complete curveball and ask you, how did Ascot go? I did see you post on Twitter
Yeah.
that you did pretty well in the $30 contest there on
Yeah.
Stable Duel, but yeah, how did that happen? Where did you kind of key around, or what were your strong opinions today?
Yeah, my strong opinions ended up doing really well. My strong opinions didn't kill me. So I didn't get too creative with certain horses like Luxembourg and um like some of the higher priced horses. Where I did get a little bit more creative was with horses like Chess Piece, and in some other races, Most Def from a stable duel standpoint, I thought just made a ton of sense because he didn't cost much money to the daily fantasy cost of the game, and it was a very short field, and you were going to get positive points basically no matter what. And those are the races to attack at Royal Ascot, as opposed to some 25 horse 2-year-old field, where it's just mass chaos and total confusion. Um, but yeah, I think I hit like second and third in just about every single race at the very least, and then hit the winner in 3 of them. So and I also, I'm not afraid, at least in the stable duel setup, to just skip certain races. Like, I'll be honest, I really spent a lot more time handicapping the group stakes races rather than the handicap races, and so I just like skipped I think race 6 altogether, because I was just like, I don't have a strong opinion here. I don't want to take a shot in the dark. I'd rather go with horses that I have a stronger feel for. So that was kind of the way I approached the day, and yeah, it worked out all right.
Nice. Yeah, I was laughing because I had so Naira Bets ran a like 20%, I think, bonus on Royal Ascot wins.
Hmm.
And so I was like, all right, I'll put a couple win bets through, through Naira Bets, see if we get something. And literally first race, bam, I had that George Weaver horse that won
Hmm.
9-1. And then I looked a little bit closer, and apparently the bonus is capped at $20 per player per day, or at least the one I got. I know it's
Yeah.
based on, sometimes if you're a bigger player, you get a better bonus.
Yeah.
But basically, I hit the $20 maximum basically the first race because that was a 9-1 winner.
Hmm.
And I think I had a couple other winners, but yeah, it was interesting. I actually completely forgot that Stable Duel ran those contests. I did see our mutual friend Sarah El
Yeah.
Bagwi. She did really well on horse tourneys, I think
Yeah.
yesterday. So
Yeah.
I think she won the $12 contest or whatever they run for a couple hundred
Yeah.
bucks.
She really keyed in on Bradsell. That was her big hit. That she, who of course, that there was some contention whether or not Bradsell would get taken down in favor of Highfield Princess, and Bradsell stayed up. So that was Bradsell stayed up. So that was a big hit for her, I know. And yeah, just to circle back, I was just making sure because my memory kind of eluded me for a second. But today, Rogue Millennium, I know, was a horse you and I both liked
Hmm.
and did well on. That was one that I keyed in on at Stable Duel. And then again, kind of using favorites that I thought were very logical, like a Gregory, and even like a Beautiful Diamond, who admittedly finished third. But I just thought, this horse isn't going to run a bad race. And in stable duel, that's kind of a key. It's just avoiding negative numbers and negative horse value. So it was a successful day. Yet the first day wasn't bad. I think I picked 3 winners in the first day, but the problem was the long shots that I thought might run well just absolutely killed me, and they didn't run well at all. And so that was a little bit back to the drawing board. I know we got a few more days of it to come. So
Yeah, that I know. And not to talk too much stable duel, because I'm not a humongous player anymore. There, maybe here and there I'll play like on the big days when they have stuff. I think I did the big Saudi Cup contest I did this year. And occasionally I think I will jump into the Gulfstream one. I don't know how much Caleb plays much either anymore, but yeah, that was definitely the key with the Saudi Cup stuff. Was just like, hey, like, don't get any negative points.
Yep.
There's a ton of races. They're big fields. Don't get negative points. Sometimes taking a long shot that doesn't cost a lot of money, as long as if you think that horse is going to finish, 4th or 5th and pick up some positive points, sometimes that's all you need.
Yep.
But yeah, it's an interesting format. It's fun to play. It's like you said, it's relatively cheap. I prefer still the pick and pray type stuff that Horse Tourneys does, but but no, it's definitely it's another way to play the races. And I know we were talking earlier, you're like, yeah, like I'll play a $10 contest, and it's like, all right, I capped the card, like I can go ahead and maybe you don't love the card, right, and you don't want to invest in the pick 5 or pick 6 or whatever. You don't want to invest $200, $300, $400, however much you're going to bet in the day. Instead, you're like, all right, I have it capped. I don't love it. Here's $12, $10. So the handicapping doesn't go to waste almost. And I think both stable duel and horse tourneys they're really good. They're good options for that type of thing, right? Like you handicap the card, you hate it, but at the same time, you're like, if I'm right here, I at least want to get something, So
exactly, and it works both ways, right? I mean, there's that idea of like, I hate this card. All right, well, it's only gonna, I put in all this time and effort to cap it. I'll play a horse tourney. I'll play a stable duel entry. Do that. On the flip side, sometimes you cap a card and you're like, I really like this card, and suddenly you find yourself playing more sequences, more bets than you thought you were planning on playing for that particular race. And so in that regard, stable duel, horse tourney is a good way of also increasing the handle at the tracks, because you get more people involved in the game through that, but then they enjoy it so much that they start playing the track for real. So it ideally it's a situation that benefits everybody involved.
Yeah, and not to, I guess, get too deep into the tourney stuff. I like it, and actually this weekend Hawthorne's having their tourney, so I'll be playing in that. But that's obviously a live money tournament. But I think tourneys are just a very, very fun way to play. But yeah, like oftentimes, like one of the nice things about playing a tournament, especially if you're like someone who plays a pick 5s a lot, right? I mean, is there any worse feeling? And Caleb knows this one, where all of a sudden it's like, all right, you like this 20-1, you like this 12-1, you like this 5-1, and it's like there's a 6-5 horse in the middle that you hate and you don't use, and he ends up winning and just busts all your tickets. You can still get a little bit of value out of those opinions,
Sure.
using them in a tournament. So
absolutely.
And oftentimes, I mean, I think some of my best tournament days have really just been getting 2 bombs home and maybe getting another mid-price home, and like sometimes that's enough to just win the thing. So stable duel is a little bit different because like you can't be that wrong, otherwise you can get punished pretty heavily. But definitely with like pick and pray stuff, I think that's definitely a viable strategy, just picking bombs you like, and
absolutely. I mean, it's the definition of that's why we don't play chalk, right? I mean, it's why a lot of times because you have to be right a lot at a higher percentage to make money betting chalk. But if you sit there and you have a strong opinion about just 2 long shots in an entire card, you might go 2 for 12. But if those 2 come in at a price, you're doing well for the day. So I always try to. I think that's something that some people focus a lot on like their win percentage as opposed to maybe their ROI and things and just balancing that and going, is it more important to give out the highest percentage of winners, or is it more important to give out winners that are actually going to return the most amount of money for people?
Yeah. My friend Tommy Massis, he always says the I think he says like the refrigerator, right? That's always that's how you tell a successful horse player. You know, what's in their fridge? Like, is there food in
Yeah.
there? There is. All right, we're good. Um,
That's a great. I like that. That's really good.
but yeah. So, anyways, Matthew. So, I think we were maybe it was last Thursday. You had mentioned the connection that you kind of had with Andrew Champagne.
Oh yeah.
How and
Yeah.
Andrew brings this up all the time too. Every time I mention your name, Andrew seems to mention this story how you kind of succeeded him over at Odds Checker.
Yeah.
So I guess why don't you talk like how did you even kind of get involved with horse racing in general? And because I mean you're a
Yeah.
content creation machine. All right. There's just like the other day, Caleb posted something. I think it was your Ascot preview where you went through all 17 stakes,
Yeah.
and Caleb is just like, how? How does this man do this? Like what?
Yeah.
So I guess why don't we kind of start from the beginning? Like what kind of got you into the horse racing content scene?
Yeah. So it's funny. I mean, obviously, I've been a lifelong horse racing fan, but the content part of it actually came about during the pandemic. So my much younger brother, Nathaniel, who is 16 years younger than me. So I'm 42. So he's 26. He was 24 at the time. He had just graduated college a couple of years previously and wasn't really sure what he wanted to do. During the pandemic, he decided, I really want to get into podcasting and I want to build a podcast company. And he didn't want to build it in terms of being the voice of the podcast company. He wanted a lot of experience producing podcasts and posting them and doing the behind the scenes stuff. And because he's the baby of the family, he managed to convince all of us in the family to start making podcasts. And so my dad started doing like a This Week in History podcast, and my stepmom had a YouTube cooking show. And I, because I taught political science for years and years, had a political podcast back in 2020 and around focused on the election and all this other stuff. And so we were doing this and he was really enjoying it. And then spring of 2021, leading into the Kentucky Derby, I said to Nathaniel, who knows absolutely nothing about sports, he's the most sports illiterate child I've ever met in my life. And he just knows nothing. I was like, there's a lot of sports in the spring. I said, there's the Masters, there's the NFL draft, there's the NBA playoffs, there's, then there's the Triple Crown. And I said, would it be okay if I tried to make a video and you could post it and, produce and edit it on YouTube? And he goes, yeah, sure. So I made a Kentucky Derby video and a Preakness video, and they didn't get much traction. And for some reason, I made a Belmont video, and it got like 5,000 views, which was by far and away the most engagement like any of our videos had gotten to that point. And I was like, oh wow! And people were like, oh, I really enjoyed this, and you should do this more often. And so I was really getting kind of sick and tired about talking about politics, as I want to, as is typical. And so I just started shifted focus right then and there based upon the success of the Belmont video. And I said, what if I just started doing a show every week, just previewing the graded stakes races at the biggest cards on the weekends? And that's kind of when I started the initial permutation of what was the Win Play show. And, had you on initially, pretty early on in that process. And, it became a show where I would interview people. I would do kind of horse racing news episodes. I do handicapping episodes and that sort of thing. So that's kind of what got me into it. And then fortunately for Nathaniel, the business started taking off. Like he actually started getting real clients paying him real money. And he went to us and was like, I can't keep doing this for free just for the family. And so I was like, it was a good run. And, we stopped doing it. And right as I stopped doing it, Bree Mott from Stable Duel reached out and asked if I would, be interested in doing some content for them. And that's right around the time that Andrew was, putting in a good word for me at Odds Checker. And I started doing a lot of content for them around the Triple Crown last year. And it just kind of all took off from there. Joined the guys on Trust the Profits. And It's just been a blast doing it. And it had so much fun creating content, interacting with people who are consuming it, and, talking to people like yourself and Mark and Caleb and just, the whole community, Chase and Barry and Gino and all these guys.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's kind of funny how your brother basically big timed you, though. He's the one who got you started,
Yep.
and now he's like, "Hey, you know, I can't do this for free anymore. Like,
Right.
I'm
No,
sorry."
he's got his own podcasting office and recording studio in downtown Greenville, South Carolina. He's got like big time clients, like the Greenville Chamber of Commerce comes to him to like produce all of their podcasts.
Hmm.
Like he's built this really, he was just featured. I'm so proud of him. He was just featured in a CNBC story online for like three millennials who have bucked the 9 to 5 trend. And yeah, as being this kind of entrepreneur. And he's a really smart, great kid, and I'm so proud of him. But it's so funny how he's kind of got me on this other trajectory now with with my hobbies and my spare time.
Nice. That's so funny. Um, yeah. Yeah. Because like I just remember, that's we kind of picked this up a little bit before before the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
But I really think that that's where, like, during the pandemic, I mean, we were just like looking for stuff to do. I mean,
Sure.
Caleb and I were playing like video games at night, like every single night, and we're like, hey, like maybe we should, let's keep doing the horse racing stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, that's funny. And like it's just it really is kind of a small world because I mean, Andrew, I had known of him for a while, and um we were in a mutual kind of group chat,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember, I've never really been big on the content side with like bringing in guests, and it's nothing to do really with um it's nothing really to do with like the guests themselves,
Mm-hmm.
as much as like I like started to think, I'm like these people are like on every single podcast, like
Yeah.
you listen to Jason Beam, right? He gets one guest, and then all of a sudden you notice that same guest is on like every single podcast, and I'm like, all right,
Yeah.
let's let's try and keep it small, bring in guests, but not necessarily like my friend Ed. Like I love
Right.
Ed, but Ed's on everything. I mean, he's
Yeah.
done stuff for me before, but
Sure.
like I don't want to be like, hey Ed, like yeah, like I know you just did like 30 podcasts. You want to do another one?
Yeah.
But I know him and like Emily
Yeah.
from Optics, like she came and did one, and she's always like, yeah, just let me know, like ask me. And our friend Sarah as well.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah's always like, hey, like, and I know like that's more like Chase tries to have kind of like a guest on his podcast every week, and we're
Mm-hmm.
kind of like the opposite. It's like, all right, if someone's not here, we'll bring someone in. Which, by the way, Matthew, we might have a need on Thursday again. Um, but um, but yeah, it's just and it's funny though. But like you look around, it really the horse racing content
Yeah.
space isn't like super huge.
Yeah.
So yeah, so you see a lot of rehashing and stuff. So like we're trying to like, or at least in my mind, I'm like, let's try and keep that down to a minimum.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
But
but
yeah,
yeah, no, but oh, go
yeah,
ahead.
no, it's interesting you say that because I think that was one of the things when I would bring on guests, I'm always very intentional about when I bring on guests and who I bring on because I kind of do it for one of two reasons. Either one, I think this is somebody who maybe hasn't been on many shows and most people don't know much about, and I think there's a real benefit to having people who may not have had a voice previously to be on. And like even that was one of the rationales I had behind inviting Sarah on when she just like came on Twitter the first time, and when she had like 90 followers, and I was like, this she seems really smart. Nobody's talking to her, and like I should have her on show.
Hmm.
And then she's got a friend Ryan Gamino, who's a really nice guy who does a lot of Southern California handicapping, and so like having him on, and then this Derby season in particular, Derby prep season, I was very intentional about like if I'm going to handicap Churchill, let's say, or if I'm going to handicap Keeneland, like I want to have Gabby Gaudet on. Like I want to have like the person who's at the track who knows, the ins and outs of the track, knows the trainers, knows the horses, and can really add something to the podcast or into the show. So it is one of those things where it's a delicate balance, because I'm like you, where I'm like, well, this person's been on 50 podcasts. Like, I don't, if they come on mine, like, what's the big deal? People have already heard what they have to say about this weekend or this race or this track. And so just trying to, figure out the right balance of guest, and just when I decide to go solo too, because a lot of my content too is rather long form, and in terms of like capping an entire card, and doing that with a guest can get really long. So it's just being, very deliberate about who I invite on and when I invite them on.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, it's just interesting because, yeah, I mean, Sarah, having that was the first time I saw Sarah anywhere, and then like you said, it was like the same thing. Like all of a sudden, Sarah was everywhere, and now Sarah's at Naira, right? And
Yeah.
it's just like I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, I was like, um, yeah, because I remember especially with a lot of that early stable duel content. Uh, was it Jeff from Charting Horse Value? He was on
Oh
a lot
yeah.
of stuff. You'd see him
Yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah.
So it's just funny. It's funny how I don't know if it's like that syndrome where people like they see the car they own everywhere.
Right.
Like I don't know
Right.
if it's that, like all of a sudden you see that person once and you start noticing they're everywhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really funny.
It is.
Yeah, I mean, like none of us are getting rich doing this. We do it for fun,
Absolutely.
obviously, and you know, um, it's it's interesting. I feel like we on the wrong lead have managed to avoid a lot of the nonsense that happens on
Yeah.
Twitter.
Hmm.
I've gotten myself involved personally, but not necessarily, putting the on the wrong lead channel in there.
Hmm.
But yeah, I've noticed that Andrew especially he I don't know what that man does to upset people. But
So
man,
many things.
he gets so many people riled up. I saw you kind of you have a little bout with a hater at some point a couple weeks back,
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and yeah, it's just
Yeah.
yeah, it's funny.
It-
I try to stay out of it because I'm like I really don't care. I do this for fun.
right.
Like my goal every year is to break even,
Yeah.
right? There's so much, like I pay for, our video software that we use here. I pay for our hosting for our
Hmm.
website that's very severely underutilized. And just to be able to cover that, right? If
Yeah.
I can cover that, like I'm happy,
Yeah.
right? I like
Yeah.
whether it's through selling t-shirts or doing YouTube ads or getting
Yeah.
anything through affiliate stuff. But yeah, man, it's just
Yeah, well, you know me. I mean, I tend to be very diplomatic online. I try not to get involved in too much stuff, and I try to stay out of the silliness of it. And it's always funny when people like, it's never, I've never at least perceived it as me ever going out and seeking it, any engagement with people who want to have a problem. It's more people just like all of a sudden like wanting to engage in a negative way, and I'm like, listen, I'm giving out picks for free. If you don't like them, you can ignore them. Like, I'm not charging you money for this. Like, this is just my opinion on things. I'm having fun. If you don't want to have fun with me, that's okay. The internet is a very large place, and there are more than enough people that you can go and find stuff with. So I always kind of get a little shocked. I mean, it's one thing I understand, there's some people who kind of go after the touts who are, charging money for picks and things like that. And that's maybe another thing. But like, people like you and me who are, we're just doing this for fun. The content's all free. Why are we getting upset about things? Like, it's just opinions, and it's just talking horses. And, I try to have fun with it. And yeah, Andrew, I don't know what Andrew does though, because I swear every week I'm like, how is Andrew pissed this person off? Like, what did Andrew do? And I always try to go back through like the retweets and the quote tweets to like try to find the original thing that irritated them. And it's like, I think Forte may not be a good bet in the Belmont. And then all of a sudden, like,
mhm.
all hell breaks loose.
Well,
I'm
I
like,
I remember the funniest one I saw recently was what did I think Andrew said something like, "Can we stop making charge it a thing?"
Oh yeah, yeah.
And Mark, and obviously the only rule to drinking champagne is that Mark has to catch a stray, and Mark, he says, "Can we stop making Forte a thing?" In response to Andrew saying, because Mark loves Charge It for
Right, right.
reasons unbeknownst to anybody who has eyes. But so he replied to, or he in jest said that about
Yeah.
Forte.
Hmm.
And then Mark all of a sudden just got absolutely torn up in on Twitter. Like the man's probably got like 70 followers. Like I can't
Right,
imagine he's got a ton. And
right.
just like random people were commenting, and I was just like, man, like this is like this is why when I say dumb stuff, like I make sure it's like very, very deliberate.
Yeah,
Like, hey, this is clearly, satire or a joke or something, and I do it on the wrong lead
yeah,
Twitter usually. But
yeah.
I'm just like man, like you can't say anything on there anymore. But
You got to use a lot of emojis. You have to be very literal. Like if you are using sarcasm, you got to do a lot of winking emojis, LOLs, letting people know like I'm laughing at myself while I'm doing this, like that we are not serious here. It's okay. But people really, I mean, yeah, people get very invested in it, and they have their pets and they have their favorites. And if you say, God forbid you say anything negative about them. I mean, I remember, yeah, there was one time where, and this might have been what you were alluding to, like a couple months ago, there was somebody who, and it was during the Derby prep season, and it was a horse, and I'm forgetting the horse's name right now, but he got pulled up. And it wasn't obvious that he got pulled up, but he was a horse that I absolutely did not like. And it was in like the Lecomte or something like that. And I was like, this horse has no chance. I was like, why are people betting this horse? And the horse ran terribly. And then Tyler pulled him up at the end just to be precautious. And I made a comment about like that was just, it was a bad bet. And it was like right after the race happened, I was like, that was just, I was like, I was really surprised the horse went off at those odds. I didn't see it as a good bet. It wasn't even like I'm not attacking the horse, I'm not attacking like anything. And this person was just like, this is a horse that was pulled up. How dare you start making fun of a horse that might be injured and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I'm not making fun of anybody. I'm making fun of people who put a bad bet, I think. If anybody's getting made fun of in that tweet, it's not the horse.
yeah,
And yeah, it was just like back and forth, like, oh, all right. Like I just, you just have
it's
to at some point let it go and be like, all right.
it really is tough because like, I'm very honest with myself in that I think if they took the wagering away,
Mm-hmm.
my interest in the sport goes to basically zero,
Mm,
right?
mm.
And I know there are a ton of people out there where that's not the case, right?
Right.
Where maybe, they actually don't wager that much. They just like watching the horses run, right? And
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing wrong with that. Like I'm coming from this strictly from a gambling standpoint. To me,
Mm-hmm.
this is a gambling game. Part of the whole reason that we do this show, right? Um, a lot of people, they like yes, like in the end, right? I give a horse that I like, right? I put a pick out there, right? Or A's or
Sure.
B's, whatever,
Sure.
right? But like to me, like the important thing isn't the end result, isn't the pick, which for a lot of people, that's all they want, that's all they
Yeah.
care about, right? I
Yep.
mean, but like to me, like it's more important, like the discussion
Mm-hmm.
and the process
Yes.
is much much more important, which is like why, like, I don't do this by myself. I surround myself with people much smarter than myself, right? I
Mm-hmm.
always contend that I am the dumbest person on this show. Caleb is much smarter than me, um, and much more handsome, obviously. Mark is Mark.
Right.
We'll just leave it at that. But like, yeah, like to me, it's like it's about the process, right? Like
Yeah.
it's not about me giving you, these three horses, right? It's like, okay,
Yep.
how did I get to it?
Yep.
What did I see? What did I look at? And the same thing with Caleb, right? Like oftentimes, like I'm sitting there and I'm like, I'm like Mr. Ooga Booga Caveman, and I'm looking there and I'm like, okay, I only see what's on the form, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
Caleb will say something where he's like, well, I watched this horse's replay, or like this last race, this happened and it's not in the
Yeah.
form. And I'm
Right.
like, oh, that's something I didn't catch. Like that's
Yeah.
great, right?
Yep.
So long story short, on the wrong lead is me selfishly trying to get Caleb's picks, and maybe Mark will give me a winner here and there.
I
But
love it.
yeah, but like it's just funny, kind of like like trying to come from it from an educational standpoint from that, and just I don't know, like how I always get a kick out of the people retweeting views. Right. Like
Oh
I
yeah.
remember Andrew came on a show, and of course, this never happened when it was just the three of us or the four of us, right? But
Yeah.
Andrew filled in one day,
Mm-hmm.
and all of a sudden, Andrew fills in one day, and someone takes a screenshot of like the Twitter views, which FYI,
Right.
nobody watches on Twitter. We just
Right.
broadcast on there. Like,
Yeah.
uh, it says like it had one viewer or something.
Right.
He's like, oh, look at, and I'm like, of course. When Andrew shows up, all of a sudden his like entourage decides to come in from Twitter. Like it's just ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
No,
um,
yeah, it's funny. I know some people like to do that, and there's certain accounts that like to do that a lot, and I don't really have I don't have much tolerance for that in terms of if they have their agenda to do those sorts of things, and the reality is, like you said, very few people watch on Twitter. We both have YouTube networks. I mean, that's where, and a prime example, the other night when I was doing the live stream at Assiniboia, I while I was doing the live stream, I looked down at my phone, and I think we had three people watching on Twitter, but we had 100 people watching on YouTube. But you're not going to see that on the Twitter numbers, and it's just people can make whatever point they want to make from that, but it's just it's one of those things. But it's untrue. Going back to process, I'm a lot like you in that going back to when I first started doing this, I didn't just do a podcast or a YouTube show. I would also have a picks column that was out on, my brother managed a website. And so I would put a picks column out, and a part of it was my pet peeve of when people just give out their like 4x10 selections. And I'm like, well, how the hell did you end up with that? Like, what's the logic behind any of that? Like, that's not helpful for me. You putting out a series of numbers, like that could just be dots and dashes for all I care. And so part of the logic was I wanted to at least show people my work and be like, this is why I ended up on this horse. This is why I decided to fade this horse. This is my logic behind my top three selections. And this is why I like this horse second, not third, et cetera. So I'm always big on showing process. And I think that's the most important part of horse racing. I totally agree with you.
yeah, I always hated showing my work in school. So you saying that is just such a professor thing. Like
It is a professor thing, because I loved showing my work in school because it was my way of finagling partial credit all the time. It was like, oh, I didn't get the right answer. Well, but look, I did all this other work, and they're like, well, all right, you get 7 out of 10. All right, good. Now we're talking.
yeah, how did you think the Triple Crown went this year?
Mm-hmm.
I've always had a love-hate relationship with the Triple Crown since starting to do starting to do content. And it's funny,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because once again, we talk about this. We do this for fun. Like we do this to ourselves, right?
Right.
When I took 3 days off of work and I recorded like all these podcasts and did all this stuff, like I chose to do this and I made no money from this,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know, like I just the way the Triple Crown works, the way the build up to the Derby, um, I like the fact that there's like a big day. It seems like every other week, right? Something to look forward to.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think then you get the month of June, which
Right.
you get the Belmont at the start, and then
Mm-hmm.
basically as soon as Belmont's over, it's like all right, when's Saratoga start?
Yeah.
And which is kind of
Yeah.
like where we're at right now. I mean, last week we did a live stream to talk about racing at
Monmouth, because I was on it.
Monmouth. Yeah,
I
yeah,
remember
you're
that.
on it.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can see the numbers, you can see the viewer numbers when you're doing this, right?
Yep.
And it's like, like obviously no one else is like sitting here like foaming at the mouth to bet Monmouth,
Mm-hmm.
unless you're maybe Barshu, because I know that man loves
He
loves
does love
Monmouth.
some Monmouth. Yeah.
But it's just like, you know, I don't know. I like the aspect of the Triple Crown and the lead up to the Derby because it forces these big days,
Yeah.
with not just 3-year-olds running, but
Right.
also the older horses and turf horses and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I kind of almost feel like I don't know. I feel like it. I think we end up putting all this emphasis on what essentially ends up being like 3 or 4 big days of racing,
Right.
and I don't know. I feel like we could maybe do a better job of spreading it out, but I don't know. Maybe that's just me.
Yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, I think the challenge is that it's both the biggest thing for our sport in terms of the general public. It's when the most. I mean, horse race players will always say this is the Breeders' Cup, but in terms of the general public, it's always the Kentucky Derby. It's and if you have a Triple Crown possibility, then it's going to be the Belmont. It's going to be a huge day as well, and so on one hand, it's great because it gets a lot of eyeballs on the sport and you hope for a good day and a big day and a great story and a lot of great narratives coming out of it. And you hope that it exposes people to other horses, like you said, on the undercard of those days, on the turf, older horses, etc. But you're right. It kind of consolidates everything to this 5 week period where the public basically doesn't know horse racing happens either before or after that.
Mhm.
And, for those of us who follow it closely, we obsess over all of these preps going back to their 2-year-old years. And every week it feels like there's a new prep at a new circuit. And we're sitting there and dissecting this. And there's so much excitement around it that ultimately, after the Triple Crown is over, it feels like there's a gigantic letdown because it's like we've been doing 5+ months of research on this one crop and the select group of 15 to 20 horses. And now suddenly it's like, oh crap, what do we do? Like there's nobody
Mhm.
else. Like it's like you just emerge out of a cave and you all of a sudden you have to look at all these other races and all these other courses and horses. And I do think it's a way. I think if we could spread things out a little bit more, I do think it would be beneficial. I know there's a lot of Twitter discourse about, and not just on Twitter. I know there's discourse in the industry about do we need to change the Triple Crown, and do we need to do it to help the horses? Do we need to do it to ensure that we get more participation from the top horses across all of the races? But I think a tangential benefit to this would be you space things out for the public too, that the public would suddenly be more interested in horse racing for 3 months rather than for 5 weeks, and or a minimum of 3 months perhaps, and even stretching it out longer. So it's a complex issue. This year's Triple Crown I think was a really fascinating one in that obviously there's all the drama at Churchill Downs leading up to the actual race, but leading up to that week, I felt like this was a very evenly matched crop. And it was a crop where there weren't particular standouts. I thought you could poke holes in every single horse, which I know some people want to see that super horse emerge every year. But I think that that's what makes super horses so special is that they don't emerge every year and they only emerge once a decade, or once every 2 decades. Just seeing some monster come in and just wipe everybody out every year, I don't think is particularly good for the sport. So I think it's seeing this ultra competitive group is really great. And that's what we ultimately saw play out in the 3 races. Mage winning the first one, National Treasure winning the second, Arcangelo winning the third. Two of those winners, very small connections, Gustavo Delgado and Jenna Antonucci. And then you had a horse like Two Fills, ran a really game second, from Larry Ravelli. So it was great to see small barns, doing well, and great stories and great narratives that were out there for the public to latch onto. But I think now that we're kind of coming out of the Triple Crown season, it's an exciting time for this crop.
Yeah. I was telling Andrew this last week, and for our listeners, if you guys didn't hear, this is something to check out. There's this other podcast. It's called The Better Life,
Hmm.
Bettor. It's a guy named Timothy Lawson. I know he's, I think he is like he's been doing podcasts for a long time with random people. So I'm not trying to downplay like if he's someone important. I don't know. Like I just know he has his podcast.
Hmm.
But on May 17th, he did an episode with Drew Dinsick, who I think works for he might work for NBC
Hmm.
Sports now. I forgot.
Hmm.
But he reflected on the Kentucky Derby, and I think it's a really I think if you get a chance, listen to it because he really talks about um just kind of the I don't know, just a general feel of like somebody who doesn't live in the industry,
Hmm.
right? About how they feel about how they feel like how like the thoughts of what's going on. Like he was like he got asked at one point, how was the vibe at the track, with all
Yeah.
these deaths and everything going on. And Drew's just like, you wouldn't have been able to tell anything was going on. It was business as
Right.
usual.
Right.
And like, so it's, I think it was an interesting look into, somebody who's involved with the sport, somebody
Mm-hmm.
who's outside of it, and somebody obviously just kind of explaining, just like the disconnect, because there
Yeah.
is a big disconnect, I think, between the
Huge.
outside world and the close knit horse racing world, right? Like, I
Yeah.
think like we're more aware of stuff that's going on, and then like sometimes like the couple times a year the outside world is like looks in, they're like,
Yeah.
oh, this is odd. Why are things done this way? What is
Yeah.
going on?
Yeah.
So it's always it's an interesting podcast. Like, have a listen. I think it's like an hour long or something, but
it,
it's
that's a really interesting point, and that's a really fascinating aspect of, I would argue, the Derby, the Preakness, and the maybe less so the Belmont, but particularly the Derby and Preakness, is there's almost a distinction between what I would say the horse racing community, the general public, and then the people who attend the Kentucky Derby and the Preakness and the Belmont. And those aren't people who are, that have fallen prey to the marketing of our industry sometimes, of wanting to just dress up. And I say this as somebody who, my gimmick is I dress up, but if you see me out in public, I look like the dude most times from Big Lebowski. I'm walking around in my flip flops or slippers. And so, it is one of those things where people get so focused on the dressing up and the social scene. And it's about having a party and it's about having a good time. And they're not really there for the horses, and they're not really there. They'll put a few bucks on things and they'll gamble, and that's great. But they also aren't really part of the general public, in that they don't. The point I'm getting to here is, I can't tell you the number of people who have written to me over the last 2 months and sent me an article and goes, "What's up with these horses dying? Like,
Mhm.
what's up with this story?" Like, so no, the vibe at the track on those big days is just like, let's have a party, let's have a good time, and it's just like, Bonnaroo or some other fest, basically, but just dressed up. But I think the general public, when they look in, usually is somewhat horrified by what we're doing, or the situation. And it's just one of those things where, I think again, because people don't pay attention to the sport regularly, because people don't really understand horses in general, not just horse racing, but horses overall, they get very misled by headlines. And they see a horse, or they see several horses die at the track, and they think this is a calamity. And explaining to them that horse deaths per thousand in the races is actually down significantly from 10 years ago, that we've done more to promote safety in the sport over the last 10 years. And that a horse, and I say this because I had a friend who this happened to, who owned a horse, not a thoroughbred, just a draft cross, that he used to ride on the weekends. The horse was just turned out in the field, frolicking around, took a bad step, they had to put the horse down. Like, it just, that's not horse racing that does that. That's just the physiology of the horse. That if they hurt their lower extremities, it's almost impossible for them to recover from that. So, explaining all of those things to people is complicated and takes time, and it takes nuance, and people don't have time for that, unfortunately. So it's, and this Triple Crown season, listen, you're right. The Derby was kind of marred by all of those deaths leading up to everything at Churchill. Then you had Bob Baffert reemerge and win the Preakness, and then you had Jenna Antonucci come back and win the Belmont, and that was maybe the palate cleanser of the experience. But ultimately, the very next race, if people kept watching, a horse was a horse broke down in that last race at Belmont on that Saturday. So it was there were a lot of ups and downs, I'll just say, about this Triple Crown season.
Yeah, this is going to be, I think, one of the weirder, I think, Triple Crown seasons that I think going forward, like, people are going to look back at this and be
Yeah.
like, yeah, this is a weird year.
Yeah.
And you know, I was talking to Andrew about this a couple weeks ago, and I was like it really feels like we're at a crossroads right now.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's really going to be, I think, the next couple months, the next year maybe is going to be really important in what happens to horse racing 5, 6, 7 years down the road.
Yep.
Because I think there's just more and more eyes kind of coming back to horse racing,
Mm-hmm.
going back to, the Santa Anita situation a couple years
Mm-hmm.
ago.
Mm-hmm.
That is still fresh in people's minds. Especially if you look at like news articles and stuff, because
Yeah.
if you see one talking about Churchill Downs, almost always they're mentioning,
Yep.
the situation at Santa Anita. Um, but yeah, it's definitely been a weird year. I will say, and I'm sure this isn't an original idea. I'm not saying that he like came up with this. This is a 100% original idea. But my friend Bobby, in one of our group chats, had mentioned at a certain point, um, well, we should do it the Triple Crown. First Saturday in May, first Saturday in June,
Mm-hmm.
first Saturday in July, and you make each of those a humongous party event, and do there was it Diplo? There was like a huge artist that they had for Belmont, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
They've had huge art. They had Bruno Mars for the Preakness. Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
they did. Bruno
keep
Mars.
that going. Who cares? Like,
Yeah.
right? Like, make it a party. Like, and
Yeah.
space it out by a month. And I know, we joked about that horse racing league or whatever thing, right?
Right.
But hey, you space these events out by 4 to 6 weeks, right?
Yeah.
And you know what you're gonna have? You're gonna have the same horses running in each
Mm-hmm.
of these, and
Mm-hmm.
people are going to start connecting to the horses, and that's how
Mm-hmm.
you build. People are always like, "Oh, well, no one's a fan of horses because they all retire at 3," and it's like, well, hey, if you see these same horse like rivalries, they'll start happening, right? You'll have
Mm-hmm.
that. I always forget. Is it Easy Goer and Sunday Silence? Or
Yep.
those the two? Yeah,
Yep.
like you know, uh, you'll have that. You'll
Yeah.
have John and
Affirmed.
Briali versus
Yeah.
the photo.
Yeah.
You'll have all kinds of matchups. But
No.
yeah, I don't know. I thought I'm like yeah, and he's like yeah, he's like young people will get around the fact that hey, the first Saturday of every month, or at least over the summer, like there's this big horse racing event.
Yep.
Um,
And I think
oh
then that's where you can really pick up on, okay, what's the first Saturday in July? What's the first Saturday in August? I mean, that would be amazing to see the coordination across and talk about a pie in the sky idea, coordination across the industry, which would require tracks actually, putting the industry's best interest forward overall and, things like that. But, just follow up on that idea, like the first Saturday in January, like move Pegasus up to that. Like, New Year's Eve basically, or the first Saturday in February, first Saturday in March, first Saturday in April. Like make these preps, like put them all on the same day, like get them going. And, if you can train people into it's the first of the month or the first Saturday of the month, this is going to be the big race day. Then they'll get trained for that pretty quickly. And it's like, oh, and the other thing we have to do is increase the purse sizes. Like we gotta, the Preakness can't be like, what is it, 1.6 million or something like that. It's gotta be like the Triple Crown's like 5 million. Each race is 5 million or more. And like we got to almost do what the Saudis do over in the Middle East. And it's like, just throw a ton of money. And guess what happens? Aiden O'Brien and Charlie Appleby and everybody and their cousin brings over the best horses because there's $20 million at stake. And like, that's how you get the big names to come out. And, that's just going to require a lot of fortitude and a lot of financial backing, quite frankly.
yeah, there was a so there's a podcast I listened to called Crap Vegas, right? And it's a bunch
Mm-hmm.
of guys talking about craps. And they do trip reports and stuff, but they also like they'll talk about just whatever's going on in like gambling, or people write in with stories and stuff. And so they were talking about they're talking about like I think it was like a Caesar's earnings call. And they were
Mm-hmm.
talking about how basically Caesar's loves all these expensive events coming in because now they can kick out the bottom end. I mean, the guy literally said that. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
we're gonna kick out the bottom end visitors, and we're gonna replace them with higher end visitors, right?
Sure.
And which in the long run means limits going higher,
Yep.
comps going down for the lower end, like this kind of stuff.
Right.
But and I kind of thought about it, and I'm like, this is very short sighted, because the guy who comes to Vegas with $200, $300, right, for two
Mm-hmm.
3 days or whatever, right,
Mm-hmm.
and gambles that, right.
Mm-hmm.
If he has a good time, that person eventually turns into the person bringing, I don't know, 2, 3, 4,000, right? Not two,
Mm-hmm.
three, 400,
Mm-hmm.
and I think horse racing is the same, right? Like, the very few people I think start off, being the person who's going to churn 50 to $100,000 a year in handle, right?
Right.
Not that that's like a humongous player, right? I would say that that's
Right.
probably what people would say like is probably a pretty serious player.
Yeah.
Um, and like you don't make those people don't just like magically appear,
Right.
right? They start off betting to being $2 betters, right?
Yeah.
They start off only spending 50 $100 a month or something on horse racing, but
Mm-hmm.
like if you don't start somewhere and start cultivating that bottom end,
Yep.
like yeah, the computers are going to be all that's left at a certain point, like they're
Yep.
going to be battling out against each other. But I don't know. I think sometimes uh, I feel like a lot of industries, and it's not just limited to horse racing, are like
Mm-hmm.
really like cashing in, like trying to, like I said, push out the bottom end, right? You
Mm-hmm.
don't, you don't. Vegas, I think, is a perfect example, right? Like you don't go and get a $7 steak dinner anymore there, right? You're paying
Yeah.
$70 for a dry aged steak at a steakhouse, right?
Right. Right.
So and not there's nothing wrong with it, right? Like I mean my wife and I, we still go multiple times a year, and
Yeah.
we still see the value, but we also live close to a big city where prices are pretty similar, right? It might be
Right.
a little bit different for somebody living in like, I don't know, Nebraska or something, right? They might see it
Sure.
and be like, "Oh, this is getting too expensive."
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's just it's interesting the way um, yeah, I think that spacing out the Triple Crown, which I know much to my usual co-host chagrin, I think it's a good idea. I know
Yeah.
he's just like build a better horse. I don't think it's so much about the horse anymore as much as it
Yeah.
is. I think like uh, trying to build the fan base somehow. But
I think it's about building the fan base, and I think that building the better horse. Because I talked to Jessica Tugwell, who's kind of our pedigree expert on Trust the Profits about this, and she's like, the horses are still. She's like, not much really has changed in the last 15, 20 years in terms of actually the horse. She's like, what changes is that they don't run after the Triple Crown anymore. That they like run one, like they'll run a race up at Saratoga, they'll run in the Breeders' Cup, and then see you later. Like that's what also kills the sport, which is like people start getting excited. Like I remember a couple of years ago, my dad loved Essential Quality, and it's like my dad's like, what? We were watching the Breeders' Cup, and he's like, well, when's Essential Quality going to run next? I'm like, well, he's not. Like this is his last race, and that's why when a horse like Midnight Bourbon died, it was like I took that like I was just devastated because I was like that was a horse that was like a war horse that you could see like keep running at like 4, 5, 6 years old. And Asmussen tends to be pretty good about like letting his horses continue to run, and I think we have to promote those types of trainers. And but there's so much lucrative financial incentive to get these horses in the stud barn that it's like, why would I risk running this horse? And that's why I talked about, if you're going to raise the pots, you got to raise them way up and make it financially lucrative for them to continue to run these horses. Because otherwise you're going to have a Loggins situation, and that's just going to become the norm, where a horse runs a blazing maiden, runs a heck of a grade 1 against Forte, and is retired and is going out to stud and is going to start producing offspring after 2 career races. And I mean, I know there's some precedent for that before, but it still is, startling to kind of see that. And you certainly don't want that to become the norm. So,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, well, after talking about that downer, we got a couple minutes left, but what are you looking forward to this summer? Like I said,
Yeah.
we're kind of in the doldrums a little bit. I mean, I
Yeah.
know Stephen Foster is still coming up, and that's usually a pretty nice day. It's going to be at Ellis Park this year,
Yeah.
which is just another just oddball situation. But
It is.
Saratoga, obviously, we're maybe a month away.
Yeah, a little less than a month. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to look forward to. I'm really am looking forward. You said it's going to be, looking back historically, it's going to be a kind of a weird Triple Crown year. I think when Mage, National Treasure, Archangelo. I agree. I mean, I think that's why I'm excited about the Jim Dandy and the Travers, because I'm excited to see these 3-year-olds continue to run against each other. I'm really excited to see what Two Phils does this weekend in the Ohio Derby, because that's he was my ace. That was kind of my guy. And I have a feeling he could potentially emerge as a really big threat to the top of this 3-year-old division. And so, there's still a lot of uncertainty there. So I think that's exciting. I'll be honest, the 3-year-old male turf division is like super competitive. I think like when you look at horses like Web Slinger and Major Dude and, some of these other horses that are running in that 3-year-old division, I think that's kind of an interesting division to take a look at. So I'm excited to see kind of what the rest of that 3-year-old turf division looks like. And then I think the other thing I'm excited about are horses taking on bigger challenges, and in particular, Cody's Wish, and whether or not a horse like Cody's Wish, who is untouched at a mile, basically, and just at this point cannot be beat at that distance, whether or not he ends up going and stretching out and running in the Whitney. And that would obviously be a big deal to see him kind of throw his hat in that older handicap division. And then also horses like In Italian and Caravelle, who seem to just have a lock on their respective divisions. And in Italian's case, it's kind of 1 mile to 9 furlong female turf division. There's no competition. Like nobody can beat her. So I either stretch her out or have her run against the boys. And so, I'd be interested to see that. Caravelle is running against the boys. And I think that's something that I'm glad Brad Cox is continuing to do that. And I know you and I keep trying to beat Caravelle every time she runs and she keeps winning. So, it's pretty thrilling, but, so I think there's a lot of great storylines to continue to follow and a lot of really cool horses and races in the horizon.
Yeah. I'm mostly looking forward to spending Travers Day in the Vegas sports book, but
Wow.
yeah,
That goes without saying.
Yeah, I think yeah, I'm excited for Saratoga to start back up.
Yeah.
I think last year was a bit of a kind of like down year. I don't know. Saratoga had some field size issues.
Yeah, they did.
And we'll see what happens this year. It seems like they're hell bent on extending that meet. Like just I'm not like no one's come out and said it yet, but they've sure said almost everything but they said something about, hey, maybe the Belmont gets run at Saratoga sometime.
Well, that's also in the context of Belmont being raised and redone, and so
but I don't know. There's a lot of I think that there might be some thinking that Saratoga's gonna want to start earlier, and they might do it similar to. I wouldn't be surprised if they do it Oak Lawn style, where they run the same amount of days, but they cut off another day, which I know people were already mad about them cutting Mondays. But now because now they run just Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Maybe they cut Wednesdays too. I mean, they run longer.
Right.
But I don't know. It'll be interesting. I don't. There's a lot of ideas always floating out there, and like I said, nothing's concrete, and nobody has said anything to that effect. But I don't know. It just seems like that's what where maybe this is going. I don't know.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's a very delicate balance, because I think what makes Saratoga so special is that it is such a boutique meet, and I love that about it, and that it is this kind of very short, thrilling period of racing, and to try to extend that out, you lose what the essence of it really is, and that would be too bad. But for now, I'm just going to sit back and enjoy it, because I think there's going to be a lot of great racing. I think you're going to see much bigger fields, it feels like, this year, and a lot of people. I mean, it sounds like Chad Brown's finally getting all of his turf horses back running. I mean, we saw a bunch of them making their debuts at Monmouth this past week. Like, okay, like now Chad's coming out of hibernation to some extent. We're going to start seeing all of his kind of A-level horses coming back out, and so it's going to be a lot of fun.
Oof, yeah. You planning a trip up there at all?
Yes, I will absolutely be up there for Jim Dandy weekend. So that's when I'll be up, which is in the end of July. And I have a lifelong friend of mine who lives up in Saratoga, or I shouldn't say college buddy, which feels like a lifetime ago. But I'll be up there visiting him, and hanging out at the track. So I'll be there, and then I'll be at Haskell I'll be at Monmouth for Haskell Day, and I'll be at Parks for Pennsylvania Derby Day, and then most importantly, Josh, I will be at Chucktown for the Charlestown Classic.
Hey, here we go. Well, thank you for filling in, Matthew.
Yeah, of course, man.
Where can people find you?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at the handle @FailedToMenace. That's where I put out all my content. Obviously, Trust the Profits on YouTube. Monday night, Assiniboia Downs live streams are always a lot of fun. And right now, I have an Ohio Derby preview out, the Royal Ascot preview you mentioned earlier. And I'm going to have a late pick 4 of Thistledown, I think, out by Friday. So a lot of different content. But if you just follow me on Twitter, that's where you can get it all.
Awesome. And obviously, you can catch us at wrong_lead. I'm at Cherry Drank. Obviously, like, subscribe, download, hit all the buttons. And yeah, we'll catch you guys a little bit later. Take it easy.